Hello and welcome to this Intelligence Squared event with me, Helen Czerski. Now, many of us dream of going into space, but in order to get there, you need some pretty specialized vehicles, and there is a risk to life which might be hard to quantify these days, but it's definitely not zero. And until recently, the only sort of model we had for getting into space was huge government-funded programs, you know, with all this national prestige and pride being staked on their success. And so today we find ourselves in this kind of awkward gap between, you know, low Earth orbit being actually pretty routine for a national astronaut, but no tickets are available for anyone who's just, you know, got a lot of money going spare and would quite like to go into space. But there are private companies pushing to fill that gap. And our guest tonight is Nick Schmidle. He's a journalist and author, a regular writer for The New Yorker. And he's been following one of those private companies in particular, Virgin Galactic. He's just written a book about all of the things he has seen, or at least all of the things he's seen and can talk about, called Test Gods. And it is out in the UK now. So if you're watching the video feed, here is the very pretty cover with the view through the porthole out at Earth. Now, just before we get started on all the topics we're going to discuss, a reminder about how the event's going to work. We've got an hour in total. The first 30 minutes, I'll be in conversation with Nick. And if you have questions that occur to you along the way, well, you can be posting them as we go, and we will get to them pretty much at the halfway mark after 30 minutes. So you can type the questions at any point during the event. There's an Ask Question button somewhere on the bottom of your video screen. And if you'd like your name to be mentioned, please do add your name. We'd love to know who you are, but you don't have to. And then press send so we get the question. And if you'd like to tweet to us, you can do that too using the hashtag IQ2. So let us get up into space. Nick, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is really fun. I appreciate it.
Well, this is a big story, and it's a big story that you tell from the inside. So we're talking about Virgin Galactic, which is one of those companies. I feel there's a few names, you know, there's kind of Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin and SpaceX. These names kind of get bandied around. But before we get to the details, you effectively wrote this book from the inside. You were kind of sitting in there being a good little fly on the wall. How did you get in there, and why did you go?
Yeah, great. Well, so I think there are sort of two questions there, the why and the how. So I'll take the why first. October of 2014, I didn't know anything about Virgin Galactic, nothing, absolutely zero. But on Halloween of 2014, Virgin Galactic's spaceship crashed in the California desert. And I remember getting the news alert and being just like stunned and saddened that someone was flying, Richard Branson, that there was this foreign billionaire, this British billionaire who owned this space company, and they were test flying winged spaceships in the middle of the California desert at supersonic speeds. And not only that, but there were actually sort of test pilots at the controls. You know, unlike some of these other companies, and we can talk about the differences later. You know, the other companies are you know, automated and uncrewed. And at this point, you know, Virgin Galactic, they are early on in the phase from day one. Anytime they light that rocket, there are at least two test pilots at the controls. And so that immediately seemed to me unique and zany and just full of curiosity. So the fact that there had also been this tragic crash, unfortunately, what often sort of draws me to a story, and at this point, I was working exclusively and for the New Yorker and kind of writing these, you know, I'd spent 6, 8, 9 months on a single magazine story. And so right when that happened, I reached out to my editor and I said, what do you think? Like, we should write about these test pilots. And his response was, it sounds great, but only if we can get real access. And by real access, it really kind of meant that, you know, Richard Branson has a very savvy PR operation. And the concern was that we go to them and they say, sure, come on in. And they sort of give us the dog and pony show, but we wanted to see them, work. I wanted to see them build another spaceship. I wanted to see them return to supersonic flight test. And so the idea, so I went to them and I said, you know, you just had this terrible moment, but I want to sort of see how you rise from the ashes. I mean, truly. And And so we had a couple of discussions about kind of what that would look like and what the end point would be. And the end point for me always was that I wanted to see them. That was the 4th powered flight, and I wanted to be with them until they flew the 5th powered flight. I wanted to have something definite to hold on to. I didn't want to end as some great, but all too many pieces about Virgin Galactic have ended with a quote from Richard Branson saying, "Tomorrow will be the day." And so that was the framework, and the restrictions were very few. The restrictions were, I said, you don't have to guarantee me anything. Eventually, I want to be a fly on the wall, but you let me in, and if you feel comfortable, you just keep inviting me, and I'll keep coming. And so all told, I made 15 trips to Mojave and was in the room for many of the very critical moments.
Well, we have this saying in England, I don't know if you have it in America, that laws and sausages are similar in that you should never see either of them being made. Is it the same with space rockets?
That's a great question. So I think I think that there are two sides, there are two responses to that, truly, because I think that the question of my confidence in the program, it actually was at its peak probably when I was spending the most time with them, because I could see how they were working through problems. I knew the men and women at the consoles. I knew the pilots, I knew the engineers. You have that personal relationship. And so you're like, all right, well, I know that, John's going to be able to figure this out. It's now been 3 years, really, since my access, since the terms of that arrangement ended. And they've had a number of problems since then. And now when I look back with hindsight, I'm like, crap, they're still dealing with this now in 2021, what they were dealing with in 2016 or 17. And so now, in retrospect, having seen a lot of what I saw, I have a more fulsome picture of the way that they're sort of doing things. And, you see like, well, this person who in 2016 was like the low man on the totem pole is now running this program. You're like, I don't know, whether I'm not sure that's, in some cases that doesn't necessarily lend confidence, but it's an interesting question because I think that my opinion of it has changed, but I felt probably most confident in where they were going when I was actually seeing the sausage getting made kind of in a day-to-day basis.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we'll come on to this later, but it's interesting precisely because most of us are not seeing the sausage being made, and that is deliberate. But before we get into the details, now, stories are told in terms of individuals. That is how we tell stories. But it also is very striking in this story that, and I don't think it's just how you wrote it, it seems to be true, there are some very strong characters here. There are people who are not necessarily... they might not have all the possible virtues a human could have in other areas, but they are very committed to this. So there are these main characters, Richard Branson, Mark Stuckey, Mike Moses. Just very briefly, just give us a headline of perhaps the 3 main characters in this story from your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Stuckey is for me the main character. He when I first met him, he was always the glue that was going to hold all of this together. He's the lead test pilot. And the thumbnail for when I first met him and decided that he was going to be the one who I was going to sort of tell the story from his perspective is that he had been chasing an astronaut dream his whole life, through the Marine Corps, through NASA, through the Air Force, and then through Scaled Composites, which was the boutique aviation firm that Richard Branson hired to build Spaceship Two. He flew the first 3 spaceship rocket-powered flights successfully. He didn't fly the 4th, in which his best friend was killed. And then I showed up as he was preparing and getting ready to fly the 5th. So for me, that seemed the obvious choice. Richard Branson is probably the second leading character, even though he has less page time, just because it's his vision. It's his vision. It's his, he's the one most obviously associated with the program. And then, I'd say that Mike Moses is probably the third. Mike Moses is the president of the company. He was the vice president at the time that I was there. He's this very sort of folksy Midwestern engineer who has this sort of old school NASA affect and speaks a mile a minute, is incredibly smart, sort of like too smart. He's already like he's doing so many things at once that had I not been recording, I would record all of my interviews and conversations with him, and I just follow him around talking to him as he's doing a million things. And I'd have to go back into my hotel and just like put it on, like 0.25 speed to be able to pick up what was going on. So so Mike was the one who could explain the technology to me in a way that made sense. Richard Branson could sort of explain the vision, and Mark Stuckey could, he was the sort of the heart and soul. But you're right, all of them, and particularly Mark, because I got most deeply in his life. That was what always appealed to me. And that's, there's sort of two subtitles. There's the US subtitle, which is The Making of a Modern Astronaut. And that's what Mark was for me. He was modern in the sense that he was open. He was willing to let this journalist rummage through his email files and everything, and just, kind of put himself out there, which I thought was, that was a really brave thing for him to do. And it gave, I think, a very unique portrait of what an astronaut looks like in 2021, which is he has all of the elements of the right stuff, all the pilots from the right stuff, but he also, you have a sense of the graininess and the grittiness and the fraught elements and the less desirable aspects of his personality that you just don't sort of see in those earlier astronaut portrayals.
Well, let's get on to the technology, because that's the sort of the theatre in which the story is told. And so this is the type of flights. I mean, we're used to, obviously, when we look back at footage of Apollo and the International Space Station, the shuttle launches and all that kind of stuff. They're rockets. They're vertical rockets. They take off, they whoosh up, they drop a bit off, or perhaps come back to Earth these days. That is not the model that Virgin Galactic are using. So just paint the picture of, everyone's on the runway where this starts. What happens as this flight takes off?
Yeah, great. So they have two vehicles that are critical to the whole operation. There's a mothership, which is the White Knight 2, and then there's the spaceship, which is Spaceship 2. Much like the X-planes in the U.S. of the 50s and 60s, these experimental rocket planes, Spaceship 2 is towed up to altitude of about 45,000 feet with the mothership, at which point then the mothership drops the spaceship, the mothership sort of banks away, and then the pilots in the spaceship light the rocket, which flies horizontally for a few seconds, then enters this near vertical ascent. And they then burn the rocket for 60 seconds, sort of crest to the edge of space, and then make this sort of spiral descent down to the runway. And the reason for this, it's really important, I think, for the whole design and in some ways for why they are where they are now, and perhaps why they haven't advanced as much as some of the other companies in recent years, is that they took this design because in 1996 there was a contest there was a contest that with a $10 million prize to the first private company that could put people in space. And the company that won this was this boutique aviation firm, Scaled Composites. And they built airplanes. They built crazy airplanes. They have more airplanes. The designer, Burt Rutan, has more airplanes in the Air and Space Museum, at Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, than any other aerospace engineer. But that's what they did. And so they just did what they knew, and they put a rocket on the back of it. And as a result, and then Richard Branson came in and said, okay, I want you to make me one of those, but with seats for 6, so it can, be the flagship of my program. But that's kind of where they are now. And there are a lot of questions as to, whether they should have, rethought the design 10 years ago as they were kind of struggling. Because one of the things is that propulsion doesn't scale. So, you have a spaceship with seats for one and a small rocket motor. And then it's not like you just make it 6 times bigger and make the motor 6 times stronger. The whole thing is just, it's kind of,
well, it costs fuel to move fuel, doesn't it? So totally. Things get complicated.
Totally.
So I think that one of the things, so, we won't go into all the details of the technology, but you hinted at this before, and I think it's really important that it's very striking, so we should probably actually clarify that the point of this exercise is to take commercial passengers.
Yes.
They're not direct competitors with SpaceX, who are supplying the International Space Station. They want to take people who've got enough money to buy a ticket to space. Yep. So it's a slightly different proposition. But what is very striking, so those of us, especially who watched the first crewed SpaceX launch a few months ago, was it nearly a year ago now? Can't remember. Yep. Is that if you looked at the space where the astronauts sat, it was quite frankly, very minimalist. It was a kind of white pod with smooth white surfaces. There were a couple of things that looked like iPads. And other than that, there was literally nothing. Yeah. And of course, we've all been brought up on images of Apollo where there's switches and like every spare space where you could put anything. There's another switch or another dial or another thing or a pencil to write down the thing that you've just turned the dial to. And there's a picture in your book of the cockpit of Spaceship Two, and it's very much not a white pod. So talk to me a little bit about this decision that to use pilots and not computers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a decision that it's a decision that they backed into in some ways because they had Scaled Composites had proven the concept in 2004, and Richard Branson came in and said, okay, well, prove the concept bigger now, right? So it had already been proven once. There's also, though, I think really central to Richard Branson's whole ethos is this kind of his adventuresomeness, his adventurous spirit, his sort of swashbuckling attitude. I mean, Richard Branson was always going to prefer that experience to the automated one, in which, like you said, I mean, SpaceX is an engineering marvel, and Blue Origin as well. But when you watch the astronauts, they're not doing a whole lot. They're a lot of the work has been done on the ground by the engineers. Now, granted, if there was ever an emergency, I suspect these extraordinarily well-trained astronauts would do something that would, I don't know, but on a routine flight, there's not much to do. So what did they do? They went out. So Virgin Galactic went out and hired what they thought would be, who they thought would be the most qualified and the finest test pilots that they could find. That makes for me, that was always the appeal of the story. There was a human element that was just inherently so much more dramatic. There were lives lost. There had already been lives lost. There was so much skin in the game, right? But it also increases the risk factors multifold, because you have so many things that potentially could go wrong. You're banking on so many on humans not making mistakes at so many different opportunities. And so that's I think the challenge that they've run into, which is like the selling point of the whole operation in some ways is also its Achilles heel. So
let's get onto that, because there is this this question of it being about the pilot, not the machine. Is sort of critical to this way of thinking. And that as you said, the sort of subtitle for the American book is about what a modern astronaut is. And so let's get on to who these astronauts are and how they think, because it's very striking that there's a lot in this about ego, right? Yeah. You want a pilot who's going to be the top pilot, the ace, whatever, top dog, top man, whatever it is. There's a lot of testosterone knocking around. This is about the pilot, not the machine. And so let's talk about those pilots and the way that spaceflight, early on in Apollo, it was a very sexist world. Yeah. They got rid of the women astronauts because they couldn't believe they're any good, any about that. Now, it's very noticeable on your book, and this is not a criticism of you, it's a kind of comment on the story, is that all the cover quotes on the book are from men. I don't think a woman appears other than as somebody's wife until page 132. I wrote it down.
No,
this is totally, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, it's totally a little boy's story, right? Yeah. All the little boys who want to grow up and be big pilots who get to throw big things around the sky. And that's the point of the value system, right? To kind of throw machines around the sky. Is that what we need? How does this work? Because it seems to me that holds it back, as well as pushing things forward, that holds things back. What did you see when it comes to that on the inside?
Yeah, it was so patently obvious when I first got into the hangar. I mean, there were a couple of things. My first experience of walking into the hangar, it's a magical place, right? It's a magical place in the sense of you walk into a football pitch at night for the first time, and you come through the tunnel, and the lights are brighter than they ever look on TV. The grass is greener than ever looks on TV. And that was a similar thing when I walked into the hangar at Virgin Galactic. There was this this is shortly after the crash, there was this half constructed spaceship over on the side. It looked like a set of a Star Wars movie. And one of the other, though, early observations was, wow, there are no women working here. Like, there's like 1 out of every 10. Now, that's a reflection of engineering schools, though, as well, at least in the U.S. I mean, engineering schools in the U.S. are, I think, like 18% female. So the numbers are it's skewed from the beginning. I remember having a conversation with one of the communication and public affairs people at the company early on, and she said, we really need to something like we need to find you more women to talk to. And I was like, well, that sounds to be like more of a human resources like hiring question than it is like a journalistic preference question. So no, I'm very keenly aware of that, and I'm very keen. And I was keenly aware of it as I was writing it. I was keenly aware. My editor, my agent, actually, all the people working on the book and on the U.S. side, particularly, are all women, and they were like, yeah, it's like it is what it is, but it's obvious, especially at this moment, particular moment that we're living in. One of the things that I sort of tried to do was just also, I mean, there's obviously this personal thread that runs through it, and which a lot of that is also wrestling with masculinity and what have I sort of, what's the world that I grew up in and what's the world that I want to sort of, pass down to my children and all that. And it's funny you bring this up just because just today, another retired lieutenant general, a contemporary of my dad's, sent a note to my parents and said, like clearly the book is in some ways a homage to my dad and to all these pilots. But he said, in the acknowledgments, it's the mention that I make of my mom, how like, all this stuff is like chest beating, what does it mean to be a man? But like, it's my mom who's the one who kind of gives me the glimmers of radiance and life and joy and all that. And so, I thought about this a lot. I thought about it. I was keenly aware of it. And in some ways, though, like you said, you just sort of write, though, what it is and trying to sort of write characters and make characters seem like they're more instrumental to the decision making than they sort of were in my observations of them. It just, that felt insincere, So, yeah, so it's a. I'm glad you noted the page number. So that also...
Well, it was just so striking, and it's, as I say, it's not a criticism for you. It feels reading the book as though you told the story as you found it, but it raises these really interesting questions about values. And so now you mentioned your dad there, so let's just briefly describe why this story became a bit more a bit more for you than just another journalistic endeavor.
Right. So I think early on, I wrote this magazine piece. This is all the first 4 years of the reporting, all built towards this big 16,000 word piece for the New Yorker. And then as I sat down to start writing the book, I'm like 4 or 5 years into the project at that point. And I had this moment where I thought I need to stop and ask myself, why am I still doing this? What is keeping my interest? And so that at that point, it became kind of an interrogation of like, what's drawn me to the story. But as you said, I knew already from a very early conversation that I had with Mark Stuckey that he knew my dad and that my dad had been his flight instructor when they were both young Marines in Yuma, Arizona in 1981. I was 2 years old at the time. So that overlap, like I knew that my dad was central to why I was coming to this story. I knew that my interest in it, I knew that why the pilots took me seriously also contributed to who my dad was. And, this built-in presumption that like, well, if I'm Rooster's son, then I must know stuff about aviation. And then they'd start asking questions and they'd be like, oh, nope, he doesn't know anything. So once I figured out, once that personal relationship was clear to me, and I figured out that I could sort of weave that storyline in there in a way that hopefully doesn't feel artificial and sort of paste it on, then it felt like it was essential to explaining, why I stuck with this story for as long as I did, and sort of how it changed me in the process of reporting and writing it.
Well, so I just want to remind the audience, we've not got quite time. It's not time for questions yet, but you can be putting your questions in the box where it says ask questions. So do be doing that. We'll get there soon. So just coming back to this issue of values, there's this quote in there, I can't remember who said it, but you quote someone else saying that the question of whether to go into space, you need a Ferrari or a Honda Accord. Mm-hmm. This question that people are critical of governments because they check everything a million times. They have a million committees to check all the things. And there's all these people who are like, just put it there. Stop messing around. Just get on with putting it in space. And there's this attitude, there's this acceptance of risk, which is interesting because you think that in commercial flight that you would want to be even mere, like professional astronauts basically sign up with the serious possibility they might not come back, whereas someone buying a ticket doesn't. But this attitude to risk and the attitude to this kind of glorification, if you like, of the test pilot. Yeah. How is that appropriate in the modern world? Like, how does it, like, do we need that? I guess that's what I'm getting at, is do we still need, now that we know it's possible, do we still need to have, we need the cowboys to go out and, do these super risky things?
Well, So a couple things. The question of the Honda versus the Ferrari, it comes down to like when you're building a prototype, right? I mean, that's the philosophy of you're just trying to test a vehicle. You're trying to see what works and what doesn't work. And Elon Musk has made this comment. Burt Rutan, who's the aerospace visionary who designed Spaceship One and Spaceship Two, to a lesser extent, they both sort of subscribe to this philosophy. Just get it in the air. Let the test pilots figure out what the problems are. Let the test pilots get it back down, and then we can sort of make the necessary tweaks and adjustments. The question about like the glorification of it, I think that what also I found so compelling was that there were people still doing this in 2021. Like, it seemed to me when I first came to the story, it seemed to me I thought that this life of test pilots, particularly for a private company, like, or that test pilot, like, I didn't think that people took risks like that anymore. Like, you think that we live in such a sort of such a mechanized, such a I don't know. The U.S. is also so different because it's so like, everything's wrapped up in insurance and bought, like, the fact that there were people doing that there were people, like you said, that were test flying rockets. That to me seemed out of place. It seemed retro, right? I mean, that's I think why I came to it, because it was like, well, what is this subculture in the middle of the California desert? Do we need that? I think it is healthy to have. I think that desire to push yourself and to expand the envelope is like literally the technical term. But I think that desire to kind of to explore what is unexplored. And I think that if there are people who can do that better than machines. And I think that is really healthy for us as a society and as a human race. I mean, I think it's important. I think that is, I'm not taking those kinds of risks, but the absorption of that risk calculus, I think, was really helpful for me at this point in my life as well, about thinking like, what do I want to do next and how do I want to do it? And putting myself in the book was like a personal choice that I kind of, I sat there and thought like, do I want to do this? This is a risk. I could write a conventional book without myself in there. I think this makes the book significantly better, but it's also taking a risk because it gives someone something not to like about it, right? It's not just like, so I do think it's important. There is a female test pilot at the company now, but like, she's not flying the spaceship at the moment. But yeah, it'd be great to have more. I mean, this is why I think that in that final scene of the book, in which there is this woman who becomes Beth Moses, Mike Moses' wife, who does become an astronaut. Having my two sons watch her become an astronaut, I think was a really important thing for them too, to see like, it's not just an old, it's not just a boys club. It's not just a bunch of old men that are in their sort of late 50s that have had these illustrious military careers that are doing this. It's a long-winded way of hopefully touching on your question.
Well, let's come back to the sausages. So there's this sort of, one of the other threads that runs through the book is the question of what the public and investors and potential passengers know and what the engineers know. And there's this tension because obviously anyone who's trying to sell tickets or sell the idea is like, yes, we're going to do this thing. We're ready to go. It's going to be next year. And the engineers go, maybe not.
Right.
How much do the public need? Like, how much does this need to fly on a dream? And how much is that just, a bit too much marketing spin?
Yeah, and that has changed a little bit because now that Virgin Galactic is a publicly traded company, it has like a fiduciary responsibility to keep the public updated as to what's happening. But that's also, I think they wrestle with that as a company. Do we every day, like if someone like turns a wrench and a screw breaks off, are we supposed to, convey that to the shareholders? I think it's a central tension of the story. It's a central tension of the story because Virgin companies have traditionally and historically not made stuff. They have repurposed existing industries and made them better and made them more sort of user friendly or whatever, made them flashier, but they haven't made stuff. So it's like really and truly, with the Richard Branson was making records in the early 70s, but then from then until 2005, and particularly really until 2015, late 2014, early 2015, when they took over all operations for the spaceship after the crash and Scaled Composites was out. I mean, they went from not doing anything to building spaceships. And that tension between the fact that the company is a marketing company, like Virgin is in many ways a really savvy marketing company that was suddenly thrown into the business of turning wrenches and building spaceships. And I think that everyone, I mean, it was a central theme it has been a central theme of the program for the past 15 years is kind of getting out of their own way. Elon Musk is apparently a very difficult person to work for, extraordinarily high expectations. He does sort of get ahead of himself and make, give flight schedules that are oftentimes, ahead of himself, but he's still sort of producing. And he may not be on Mars as early as he wanted to be. He may not be on Mars by 2023, I think was his early, initially he said he wanted to be on Mars 23. That's probably not going to happen, but like, he's still doing some extraordinary stuff on a very regular basis. With Virgin, it was kind of like trying to clear the smoke and mirrors away and to see like what's really there. And I do think that they have the ability to continue to fly to space, but I don't know if they have the ability to like really turn this into the functioning sort of space line repeated operations kind of operation that they have talked about and think that this has the potential to be. And certainly as their financial statements suggest that it is and will be in the coming years.
Well, let's just summarize that perhaps. So in terms of progress, in this whole world of commercial spaceflight, we've got SpaceX, who are now they are basically supplying the International Space Station. They are taking cargo, they're taking astronauts. They kind of got that sewn up, as far as I can tell. NASA are not building their own rockets. Yeah. And then these other two, Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, what's the status of what they're actually doing now?
Well, as of today, Blue Origin. So they're sort of Blue Origin's primary or initial business was all suborbital space tourism, and Virgin Galactic's exclusive business with maybe side. I mean, Virgin Galactic. They are a suborbital space tourism company, meaning. And this gets into sort of a nerdy side digression if we want to talk about like what the edge of space is. But
line is, yeah. Well, it's actually important though, isn't it? Because I think it's one of those things where, as a marketing thing, like yes. as a scientist, I'm like, it's somewhere in the upper atmosphere. Pick a point, right, where you decide where the edge of space is. But actually, if you're investing in someone, the difference between suborbital flight, which is just below the von Karman line, and low Earth orbit, which is just above it, technically 100 meters makes an enormous difference to your investors. Right.
Well, okay. So we'll do a quick sort of. So the von Karman line, right, is 100 kilometers, 62 miles. In the United States, according to the U.S. Air Force, they give astronaut wings to anyone who flies above 50 miles, which is, I think, 264,000 feet. I think it's about 82 kilometers. That last part, I may not have that last conversion. I know it's 264,000 feet.
That's pretty much, I think you're about right. Yeah.
Okay. So all along, everyone has always been gunning for the von Karman line, right? That's the international accepted standard. Virgin Galactic also was aiming for that until in 2018 they said we're going to space, and they went to 50 miles, and they said, okay, and they've gotten their astronaut wings. So like they are those test pilots who flew that are astronauts. But I think Jeff Bezos himself said, like, there's an asterisk next to their name. So you could see where this suborbital rivalry, business space tourism rivalry, is going to go when Blue Origin actually begins operations. They're going to disparage Virgin Galactic for saying that you're not even flying to space, or they're going to sort of snicker. And as of today, Blue Origin, which began taking bids on seats for its, I think, July flight, I think they announced that there's a bid for $2 million that's already on the table. So that's actually like that's the arena to watch in the near term. Blue Origin also has a deep space exploration ambition, much like SpaceX, but they're not there yet. Like you said, they're not supplying the International Space Station, and they certainly are not building or test flying rockets like SpaceX's Starship, which is the amazing thing that does the belly flop and lands and most of the time. So basically, there's still there, and Virgin Galactic not there yet. They've got more test flights to do. They've got a plan, but. So I think it's helpful. Yeah. So they flew to space. Virgin Galactic flew to space in December of 2018 and in February of 2019. And it looked at that point like they were really going to make a go of it. I mean, they had 2 space flights in just over 2 months. Unfortunately, they've not flown to space since. And there was an engineering problem that grounded the spaceship for more than a year. They had a December 2020 flight that was aborted. They had a February 2021 rescheduled flight that was postponed at the last minute. So they are right now, it's hard to know exactly the extent of the problems. And then last week they announced that they're all ready to go, but now the mothership has some problems. So yeah, they're sort of, they can't get out of their own way at this point. But they're hoping to fly sometime soon-ish, whatever that means.
Okay, so just before we get to the questions from the audience, so audience, be putting your questions in. One more question for you, Nick, which is, please. If Virgin Galactic offered you the passenger seat on their next test flight, like as Beth, I've forgotten her surname, but
Beth Moses, yeah.
If they offered you that seat tomorrow, would you go?
No. I would have. If you would have asked me that question 3 years ago, right when I was finishing this up, I definitely would have. But the lack of visibility, again, coming back to that point I made earlier about like, you're around the test pilots and you're sort of, when you go skiing and on the first day someone says, you want to ski that double black diamond, you're like, no way. And then by the 5th day, you're like, I feel pretty good. I'll go ski that double black diamond. Like you've been hanging out with skiers. You're sort of, you're one of them kind of for a few days. You're seeing people do crazy things in the mountain. That's sort of how I felt. I felt like I was with the test pilots. I was in the centrifuge with them. I was flying with them. I was doing all the high G stuff with them. There's a little bit, I'm sure, of ego built into that as well. There was also the fact that I was about to start writing this book, and I thought, well, how amazing would that be for the book if I flew to space? The book's done. So like I go to my wife now and I say, hey, I want to go to space tomorrow. And she's going to be like, well, wait a second. What about all the second thoughts you've been having? And the book's already done. Like, I don't know about that. So on the next flight, probably not. But, like show some record of repeated success. And I think that calculus could change.
Okay, well, let's get on to the questions from the audience here. So first one up is from Sarah, and she'd like to know whether there are any competitors in China or any other country who could either compete with Virgin Galactic or outcompete them, because obviously there are countries in the world other than America. Yes.
So I don't know of any other private companies that are there. Certainly the Chinese government could. Look, the Russian government for a while was offering this. It was extraordinarily expensive, but the Russian government would say, look, if you have, $20 or $30 million, you can buy a seat on a Soyuz rocket and you can go to the International Space Station. And NASA hated this. It was, this is like in the late 90s, early 2000s. But Americans and others were doing this. So that I don't know if the Russians are still taking money, because I think that now if you're a wealthy person in Western Europe or the US, I think you're often going to you're going to be looking to SpaceX to give SpaceX a bunch of money to go than you would be on an old Soyuz rocket that's, hasn't, the Soyuz has been in the air since like the 70s. This is an old design, and it's, it's the AK-47 of rocket designs. It's old, but like, God, that thing is still chugging along.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right?
Totally.
I mean,
totally.
I would ride the Soyuz versus of super new modern technology that was untested, because the Soyuz has definitely been tested.
Totally.
So we've got another question here. I don't think there's a name attached to it. And it's, does the fact that this is a project that's led by the super rich for the benefit of the super rich, does that make you queasy?
What made me queasy, and what makes me queasy is when they talk about how it's for anything other than that. When they talk about how this is a project to democratize space and how we're going to open up space to the rest of the world, that's when it feels insincere and disingenuous, and just that's what makes me uncomfortable. If they would just say, this is the way, like this is, it's big money kind of going into the project. Prices will go down, maybe sometime for like those who don't have major means, you might be able to fly. Like, I think that somehow would be more palatable than when they start throwing out this democratization of space rhetoric, which I always kind of was like, ooh, don't don't start with that. It just, that's what felt, I don't know, kind of, like I said, it felt like they were selling a concept and not selling the reality. And look, the response internally to my article and to me continuing to write this book has in some ways reflected that. I think there are many in the company. I know there are many in the company who said, like, Nick captures what we do, and it's risky. And 3 engineers died in 2007, and 1 test pilot died in 2014. And like, it's been really hard, and we've had all these hardships, and it's dangerous. And there have been a bunch of aborted flights, and there have been a bunch of flights that have had things go wrong. And then there are others who say, well, yeah, but Nick's making it sound scary, and we don't want to scare away the rich investors. And that's when I'm like, guys, like, it is what it is. Like, I'm not making these things up. So so the democratization of space it leaves me a bit unsettled sometimes.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's not new. Apollo was all about military dominance. It was about whether America was better than Russia. And so that thing of, one step for all man, it's
True.
a nice line, but Apollo was not funded for all man, right? So it's interesting how they feel the need to hold on to this. Oh, it's fine because we're doing it for everyone, when in either case, it's so clearly not true.
Right.
I guess you could make a claim for the very first step being it's possible for a human, but even then,
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, using this sort of universal language to mask truly nationalist ambitions seems to me, I can sort of get behind that a little bit easier than I can the universal rhetoric that's masking like sort of elitist reality. There's some, I don't know why.
I like the idea of this being a Rorschach test for your ethics, however, the way you see it. Well, there's another question here, which is on a sort of unrelated topic in a way, which is, so there's also no name attached to it, but it is that Jeff Bezos is, also working on bringing people to space. It's very noticeable, they're all billionaires, but what motivates them? Branson, Bezos, Musk, why? They could do anything, right? Why are they going into space?
I mean, I think the answer is baked into the question because
they've run out of money to spend on Earth.
Yeah, right. It's not, I mean, it's a playground. I mean, this is the ego contest. Like, what human is going to be able to build a vehicle that's going to be able to ferry other humans to Mars? Like, that's, I mean, what bigger sort of test of vanity and ego exists, right? And I think that, I mean, Elon Musk had these dreams long before he had the means to really, I mean, he had these dreams way, way, way back when he sort of aspired to have the means to be able to actually sort of, to be one of the richest men in the world. I feel like him and Jeff Bezos sort of swap on a day-to-day basis.
Depending on who's tweeted what most recently.
Right, totally. And which to Jeff Bezos is, I feel like, well, and yeah, I mean, Jeff Bezos at least just stays out of the limelight as much as possible. But yeah, I think that it comes down to ego, and it comes down to sort of, trying to leave your mark on the world and the universe. I don't know. I can't, that's a perspective. I feel like I could understand the calculation. I feel like I could understand the mentality of the test pilot, having, grown up with a fighter pilot. And when I first met Mark Stuckey, I kind of knew that type immediately. And I felt like I could then write about him in a way that felt real and intimate. I can't do that with Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. Like there's an air gap between sort of my approach to the world and their approach to the world. So.
And well, coming back to the risk, there's a question here about whether NASA has been wrongly portrayed as risk averse by those who have most to gain from space travel. Because, of course, people forget, Apollo 1, killed astronauts, died when it was during a fire on the launch pad. That no NASA pilots have been killed. Astronauts have been killed in orbit, but They have definitely been killed on the way there and on the way back. So is NASA wrongly portrayed as risk averse, and how does that narrative benefit private companies?
Yes, I think NASA is an easy punching bag for all of these companies, right? What was the value of the space shuttle program? There was, the shutting down the space shuttle program was seen as the epitome of NASA's sort of moribund, that it had reached this moribund phase of life, and that NASA had no value to offer. I mean, NASA's flying helicopters on Mars. There are not people that are throwing the helicopter. I'm not sure sort of what more, you know what I mean? I don't know where the risk, I don't know what more people would want. I mean, NASA said when they shut down the space shuttle program, they're looking for their deep space exploration venture at this point. So I do feel like they're an easy punching bag. And how does it benefit? I mean, it benefits because it's the David and Goliath sort of rhetoric. I mean, it's this, Burt Rutan. There's a scene in the book in which Burt Rutan at the announcement of the X Prize in 1996 is just, they just announced, okay, we're going to give $10 million to the first private company. And Burt Rutan knows that he's thought to be, he's the presumed front runner in this race. And he spent the whole morning just browbeating the NASA administrator and telling him how NASA's slow and all this. And Bert shared emails in which he and Newt Gingrich are going back and forth talking about how terrible NASA is and what they need to do. But I will say what Bert's point was, and this I think is a failing of NASA, is that NASA has in recent years failed to inspire. And I think that's actually a central theme as well. NASA, it's a failure of NASA's sort of, PR machine, if you will, to show people what they are doing, and to inspire young men and women, particularly women right now, as we were talking, young female scientists, young female students to want to be scientists and engineers, and to kind of, so I think that is, it's almost like the programmatic failures or the programmatic shortcomings are there, but it's the messaging that's also fallen short. It's that what does NASA stand for anymore? Well, it doesn't stand for sort of breaking down boundaries, because that's just, they've lost that narrative, and that narrative now belongs to Elon Musk in some ways.
Well, just a quick reminder to the audience, there is still time for you to post questions, so please do that. And just wanted to pick up on that point, though, because I think the next stage is really interesting, because basically the problem of going to Mars, the real problem is the least sexy problem of all time. It's not a great big monster to be. It's not the distances of space. It's not the rocket engines. It's the radiation that will give you terminal cancer by the time. I think the last statistics were that by the time you arrived at Mars, even on the shortest possible transit, you would have a 1/3 chance of having terminal cancer.
Oh, interesting.
So the problem they've got is, and the problem with radiation is you can't fight it with a big stick, I think. Uh-huh. So I think that's NASA's problem, is that you've got this, all you can do is hide from it.
Huh.
And that is not a sexy thing to do, you know, in the world of test gods. No one wants to be hiding from the radiation. I don't know if anyone mentioned that in your, I guess maybe Virgin Galactic aren't talking about Mars yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, no, I haven't thought about that at all. I mean, I think the other least sexy thing is that you show up and Mars looks like the least interesting and least hospitable place on Earth. You know, it's like it's far worse than like the most inhospitable spot of the Gobi Desert. And you're like, well, wait a second, why did I just travel however 7 months to get here? So,
and that is why planetary, like Earth scientists like me, spend our whole time going, perhaps we should look at this planet. But anyway, it's quite nice on our planet. It's quite interesting. Okay, so we've got another question here, which is sort of. It's interesting in a very practical way. I think this is from Michael, and Michael says that we hear all the time that planes and commercial aviation are not good for the planet. Let's say, is it the same with space travel? And how does that square with everyone's newly and encouraged enthusiasm for not destroying the atmosphere of our own planet?
Yeah. It's a really tricky question because like perhaps one could argue that Elon Musk and the creation of Tesla and electric vehicles is accepting and countering in a way more than any other sort of big billionaire who has is doing more to sort of to counter the effect of climate change with electric vehicles. But what is the carbon footprint of a single rocket launch versus the carbon footprint of 50 electric vehicles or whatever? Like I don't know what that calculation looks like. I also know, unfortunately, that the average citizen in the U.S. probably cares less, and which is where all these companies are based, is probably less embracing of the science of climate change than your average citizen in Europe, which is just an unfortunate reality. I think it's a important and pressing question. I don't have a great answer to it because I don't know, like I said, I don't know what the carbon footprint is of these individual rockets. Like I don't know how a spaceship to Virgin Galactic flight, how does that compare to how many 747 transatlantic flights is that? I'm not sure. I did want to come back to one thing you just said, and we were talking about the importance of this planet. One of the reasons why when I first was getting into this project, I'm not inherently interested in deep space exploration or landing on Mars. And I think that probably 99% of the book takes place here on Earth. Like it's space is kind of this metaphor. We're all looking up to space. We're all sort of thinking about how we can transcend ourselves and expand ourselves and do all that. But and in the end, those, when I don't want to spoil the ending, but Mark Stuckey chases this astronaut dream his whole life. And then when he gets the dream, when he achieves the dream, that moment that I spent with him that night in which he's kind of reckoning with that was pretty cool, but it's equally cool. And I'm there's a renewed appreciation, I think, also for kind of what this planet has to offer. And that is one of the things that Richard Branson, I've heard him say that, and it does feel genuine. And I think that's kind of, this was always for me an earthly book rather than a space book, and a project that was kind of about finding value in this world as much as the ones beyond.
So there's quite a practical question here, which is particularly on this type of flight. I think the one Virgin Galactic is proposing. There's no name attached to it, but what kind of activities would space tourists do other than look out of the window? I mean, the view out of the window is probably quite good.
Yes. I mean, the view out of the window is stunning. Not much. You're not up there that long, right? I mean, you have time to unbuckle. You have time for a few somersaults. You have time to, the view is stunning. The photographs outside the cockpit are pretty amazing, but there's not a lot of other, it's not too much time to do other things. I mean, I suspect your your heart is still, you're still sort of, dizzy from this adrenaline rush of that 60-second rocket burn. And then preparing. I mean, I will say, having gone through the flight profile in the centrifuge, going down is a lot nastier than going up. Going up, you're feeling the G's in your chest, and you have that sort of that rush as you're, as it's getting darker outside your windows. Going down, it's like coming back from a vacation, except that you're also getting this like anti-head rush where all the blood is rushing to your feet. You're coming back from vacation. You've got the low of like, crap, I'm coming back to Earth now. And all the G's, you're feeling all the G's sort of, as the blood's draining from your head. And so, I was significantly less impressed after doing the G profile once for the passengers. And I said, well, okay, why don't you do a pilot profile at 100%? I said, you know what? I don't need to prove myself anymore. I'm good for the day. So
I can see why they didn't hire you as a salesperson for their program. Although it is, people want to float. You can do 0G flights on Earth where planes drop out of the sky, and I have done that. And you get to turn the teddy bear, and you don't get what you just described with the horrible number of Gs. Okay, so next question down here. In the next decade, do you think civilian space travel is going to be normal or even possible?
I mean, yes. I don't know what normal would look like. I mean, is normal, weekly flights, monthly flights? I think monthly flights are certainly within the realm of possibility. But whether that's, I think that SpaceX is approaching a point where SpaceX this year alone could fly three of them would be NASA missions, but then there's the Inspiration 4 mission it's scheduled for the fall, which will be their first sort of, tourist mission. So I think that you could see the tempo increase pretty significantly. Will Virgin Galactic be there flying weekly flights like they say they're going to be doing in 2023, 2024? That's a lot harder for me to envision. I hope, because I've invested sort of so much in their, I want to see them succeed, because I know the people that are sort of there in the trenches, and I know how much it would mean for them to succeed. And I know, so it's like, it's not because I want, them to clear the 600 millionaires off of their flight list to be able to get that experience. But, because I think that they're trying to do something that no one's ever done. And, you want to see people, I don't want to see anyone fail that's trying to do something like that. But there are a lot of obstacles in the way. And but I do think that SpaceX will be there. I think the Blue Origin could be there as well. And I think, there are other companies that are certainly watching and learning from the successes and failures of the three we've been primarily talking about, who I have no reason to think that there won't be other companies emerging in the next few years that could easily, by the end of the decade, be doing this.
So I have one final question for you. We're almost out of time, which is, you described being surprised that this world of test pilots is kind of still there. Perhaps in 10 or maybe 20 years' time, these flights will become routine, we think. It seems likely. And, the cachet of being called an astronaut will, there might have to be two categories, because if you're a passenger astronaut, perhaps that's not the same. So what does someone like Mark Stuckey do in a world where there are no flights to be a test pilot on? What happens to a mentality like that when they can't scratch that itch?
That's a really good question. I think that his generation realizes that in some ways they are the last generation. Military pilots are coming through, and the military cockpit is far more automated than it ever was. They are still the pilots are still at the controls, but there's a lot more automation happening. So I think you just sort of, in some ways, those who the numbers are smaller. You have, a few years ago, you saw that, like, you had pilots that were sort of leaving the pilot corps and going and being in the drone corps and, sitting there with joysticks. So, I feel like that makes these pilots incredibly anxious, and probably makes their palms sweat and depressed, thinking that that is the next generation, or that's their life. And so I think they all should kind of consider themselves very fortunate to be able to still do this at this stage in their lives, knowing that there probably is not a lot, there's not another generation of test gods sort of waiting, right behind them. And I will just say in the end, the test gods quote is not, it sounds very sort of, it sounds as though I've sort of thrown myself at their feet. It actually was coined by another test pilot at, there was a bet, and this is relevant, a bet that Mark Stuckey made with a NASA astronaut in 2009 as to who would get to space first, this NASA astronaut or Stuckey. And the loser had to buy the other one a dinner and margaritas at this Mexican restaurant outside of Edwards Air Force Base. And Stuckey lost. And the dinner was in January of 2019. And I went to the dinner, and it was supposed to just be 2 or 3 people. And in the end, there were like 40 people that all showed up. And when Stuckey and Fisher got up and they were talking about their bet and giving the history, there was this other test pilot in the back of the room who said, when Stuckey stood up, he said, that's the Chuck Yeager of his generation. And then when Fisher stood up, he said, those guys right there, those guys are test gods. And so I thought at that moment, I was like, all right, so you've got within the community, you have others that even sort of recognize that there are some that are, that have the right stuff and that are sort of, ahead above the rest. And so, yeah. So, but I don't know where those guys all see themselves or see their sort of sons and see their future selves in 30 or 40 years. It's a great question, though.
Well, humans haven't run out of adventures yet, so I'm sure there'll be something. Brilliant. We are out of time, which is a great shame. It's been fabulous to talk to you. Thank you very much, Nick. Yeah. The book, Test Gods, is available. There's the Intelligence Squared link somewhere for a discounted copy in the books tab on the right-hand side if you're watching the live video. So thank you to everyone who was listening. Thank you to Intelligence Squared for organising this. Thank you to the bonkers test pilots who are apparently still giving us amazing stories to tell about going into space. And thank you, Nick. And I will hand back to Connor.
Awesome. Thank you.